Hey, Danielle. Welcome to Creative
Hi.
Inspired Happy.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here, and it's really good to see you again. We met earlier this year up in
Yes,
San Francisco.
that's
So,
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
brand new
today,
Substackers, you and I, when we
yes,
met.
yes. And I'm thrilled because today is the release of your new book, Make It Easy. And we definitely going to talk about
hmm
that. But I like to start out the conversation with taking us back to the beginning of your journey as a writer, as a recipe developer. And so, could you talk about how you got started? Because I know actually you have said on your newsletter, on your Substack, that you don't really consider yourself a writer, except that you are. You're writing all the time. You have such a beautiful, easy voice, and you're one of the most open hearted writers that I know. So
Oh,
please
thank
tell,
you.
yeah, no, it's true. And I feel very honored to know you. So tell us how you
Thank
got
you.
started in this space.
Yeah, I guess I consider myself a cookbook author, which is definitely a writer. I was actually very into journalism from like high school on. English was always my favorite class, loved writing essays. So I've definitely always been a storyteller and a writer, but I didn't really start putting it into practice until I was diagnosed with my autoimmune disease, ulcerative colitis, 2 months after my husband and I got married. I was a baby, 22 years old. And after going through a big journey on my own to figuring out that dietary and lifestyle changes could make a significant impact on my day to day symptoms, I started a blog. So this is 2008 when the blogosphere was very new. I had a .wordpress blog for a really long time, and I started just by sharing kind of my journey of walking through life with autoimmune disease, being a young newlywed with that, and then really mostly cataloging my culinary kind of journey of stripping out gluten, grains, dairy, legumes, sugar, and figuring out what to make. I was raised in an Italian family that very much centered around food. And so it was a bit of a shock. And I didn't go to culinary school, nor do they have culinary schools that teach that kind of cooking. And so it was very much just me kind of cataloging my journeys in the kitchen, my triumphs, my failures, how it was making me feel, and then ultimately started creating recipes based off of, morphing something from my grandma's recipe or from one of my favorite cookbooks and having to change XYZ to fit the new dietary needs that I had and people asking for the recipe. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll figure out how to write recipes and start posting them for you. So it was kind of by necessity, by chance in a bit, but also just for my love of sharing and kind of wanting a central place to be able to share everything I was going through.
And so you sort of built this community like through blogging, people in your comments.
Yeah. Yeah. I wrote about it in my memoir. It's called Food Saved Me. And I remember sitting on the couch every night and just going through the comments. And typically they were from Grandma Marge, my sister Lisa, my mom, and they would always leave them and I see their names, and then all of a sudden I started seeing these names that I didn't recognize. And I was like, how are people even finding this? What kind of autoimmune disease do they have? I didn't even realize that the way I was eating could affect so many of the other autoimmune illnesses. And there's 50 million Americans that have autoimmune disease. So it's not a very small, niche market when we talk about the grand scheme of things. But I started seeing people saying they made something or they found a recipe because a friend shared it with them and started seeing all these other names. So yeah, comments on the blog. And then when Facebook, this is always when I date myself, when Facebook went from not just requiring a .edu email address and they actually opened it up to the general public to be able to start their own Facebook account, that's when I started the Against All Grain Facebook account. I think it was around 2010, no, 2009 maybe. And that's really, I think, what started to spread the recipes to kind of a broader audience that wasn't just finding it by searching for it online and kind of stumbling across my blog.
And so you kind of, as you use the word stumble as well, you sort of stumbled upon this yourself in terms of like how
Yeah.
eating would help you. I don't think that gluten free was really part of the mainstream yet when you started this, right?
Absolutely not. No, no. I mean, we're talking, I was diagnosed in 2007. I probably started kind of blogging and writing recipes. Yeah, 2008, 2009. And if you would go out to a restaurant and say, is this gluten free? They'd look at you like you had five heads. There weren't very many products on the market yet. Certainly not any gluten free cookbooks. I mean, maybe a few. There were definitely a few, but it was very new. And then especially in, grain-free paleo, kind of where I really found the most relief from my symptoms, there were very few resources.
And so I would say that you were one of the trailblazers in this space, and we have you to thank now for this because I know your name from Against All Grain when that cookbook came out. And
Yeah,
I felt like you were at that forefront of the wave. And I think a lot of the conversation at the time was about celiac because that was the easiest thing for the media to latch onto. But, there's so
hmm,
many different kinds of, like you said, autoimmune diseases and other people
yeah,
who just benefit from this kind of diet. So talk to me about
right.
building this Facebook group and then how that became your first cookbook.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I started the Facebook group that was linking back to againstallgrain.com. I eventually bought the domain and switched over from .wordpress and just started to create recipes that I was missing. At that point, I think I had a young, maybe one year old and was wanting to eat things like chocolate chip cookies or, eat things like waffles. But because I had to cut out all grains and dairy, I was like, well, what do I do, to make these? And so once
Mm-hmm.
I created those recipes, I thought, well, I'm sure everybody else here that has to eat this way for, all the various reasons. And I had people coming to me for rheumatoid arthritis, for MS, for children on the autism spectrum, for Crohn's, for colitis, just this whole slew of things that I had no idea that, I thought the way that I was eating was mostly just for IBD, for digestive diseases, because it made more sense to me. I'm like, what you're eating goes through there. That makes complete sense. But, other things, psoriasis, lupus, these things that I just wasn't very familiar with at such a young age, didn't realize that they all were inherently inflammatory conditions, that they were, autoimmune diseases. And so I realized, oh, everybody else that's eating this way probably misses those fun kind of nostalgic recipes too. And so my real deal chocolate chip cookies, which we named because we used to have all these college kids in that I would test my recipes with, they would come and have dinner and I'd be like, I created a new cookie recipe and none of them had to eat gluten free. And somebody was like, oh, these taste like the real deal. So we named it that. I had a sandwich bread that sounds bizarre, but you blended up cashew butter and coconut flour and it baked up into this really nice kind of like white bread loaf. And those were the two recipes that I shared on the Facebook group that all of a sudden just started getting hundreds and hundreds of shares. And at the time, hundreds and hundreds on Facebook was great. And, so I just started seeing people sharing them and I started seeing people tag me in them. And I was like, my gosh, this is crazy. And then I started getting asked, like, will you write an ebook? So I was like, well, okay, I can write an ebook. I already have banked, 25 recipes. I can't publish them fast enough on the blog. I was already publishing 3 recipes a week on the blog at
Oh,
that time.
wow.
And, so I was like, oh, an ebook would be great. I might make like a tiny, tiny bit of money. I was thinking of charging like 99 cents for it. And then I could give this community a big bulk of recipes at one time. And so I actually started down that path. I was like looking at self-publishing, through Amazon. And I got an email from a publisher that was a somewhat niche publisher. They did a lot of gluten-free, a lot of paleo kind of at the time. And the woman actually wrote me an email that said, my daughter, I can't remember, has an autoimmune disease. I keep them gluten free and grain free because it controls their symptoms, but they have a cereal day at school once a week that they feel super left out. All of their peers are eating cereal and they're using milk and they can't have that. And I use your granola recipe, which is grain free, gluten free granola, and send it every single week so that they feel like they can have something with almond milk or, whatever it was. And she said, we want to offer you a cookbook contract. And I was like, what do you mean a cookbook contract? I don't even know what that looks like. I reached out to a friend who was an attorney and my husband actually was an attorney at the time. And I was like, can you guys look through this? I have no idea what the terms should be. I don't even know, what this is going to entail. And then they said, we'd like you to photograph it yourself and food style it yourself. And I was like, well, I'm already doing it for the blog, but I don't know about for a book. And so ultimately I ended up accepting the contract and that was my first cookbook, Against All Grain. I wrote it, styled it, photographed it in 6 months. It was 165 recipes.
Oh my
Uh, when
gosh.
I when I look back now, and if you were to talk to other cookbook authors, they're like, that is insane. It was on shelves from the time we signed contracts until actually being on shelves, I think in 10 months. It was wild. It was like the
Wow.
fastest turnaround now that I know, in hindsight. I thought that was normal and it practically did me in health wise.
Oh gosh, I'm sure. And did you
Yeah.
do all of that cooking yourself and you did the food styling like all at home in your home kitchen?
all at home and all new recipes. I think I might have pulled a few favorites like those cookies, sandwich bread that I knew people loved, but everything else was brand new, developed. Yeah, all at home in my little apartment kitchen. I would cook and I would test it. And if it worked, I would throw it down on, a surface and I'd grab my camera and I would take 500 photos of it because I didn't know what I was doing until I found one that was like good enough to, print in the vertical large style. And then I learned I had to teach myself how to really write recipes. I was writing recipes for a blog, but I didn't actually know how to write a true recipe at the time. And actually, fellow Substack writer Diane Jacobs, I got her book. It's called Will Write for Food. I read it, from front to back. I flew down to LA. I took a 1-day food photography like seminar just to try to understand some of the basics and wrote, styled, photographed, tested all the recipes in my kitchen in between my son's naps. Usually was when he'd come
Wow.
down, I'd be right in the middle and he'd reach his hand in and grab a cookie and be like, no, 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 don't, you can't touch that yet.
So, what I love about recipe creation is it's a different kind of creativity than I'm used to talking to writers about because
Yeah.
I'm usually in the literary space. So, how do you come up with the idea of a recipe? And then also, this is a question from my daughter. She wanted to know
Mm-hmm.
how many times you have to test a recipe, and does your family get sick of eating all the failures?
Such a good question. So, first of all, I love recipe writing. I love the head notes. That's probably my favorite spot. And that's because you get to tell a little story there. And I think it just brings the recipe to life to understand the background of it, why it's important to you, why you chose the ingredients you chose. Maybe it's a family memory, something like that. And yeah, it depends. The recipes, the baked goods, especially in my early days of just really trying to understand the properties of almond flour and coconut flour, coconut sugar versus regular, things like that. It definitely took me a lot longer. Sometimes things would be upwards of 10 to 15 renditions.
Mm.
At the time for that book, my family, I only had my little one, my husband. And so I would just take all of the things to my husband's office and just be like, please give me feedback, or walk him over to my neighbor's house. And so it's really fun because it kind of creates this like really quick feedback kind of back and forth between somebody who's really eating it. And I would stand there and just be like, what do you think? What's the texture like? Do you like it? Is it sweet enough? And so, yeah, no, my family doesn't get too tired of it. I think my husband he loves the baked goods. This week we created like 7 new baked goods sweets, and that's always a fun thing
Wow.
for my family.
I bet. I bet. I would like to be part of your family now.
Yeah. I know. I texted actually, we have a family that lives close by that their oldest daughter has celiac and she
Mm.
never gets to eat anything that anybody cooks because nobody's kitchen, even if they make her something that's gluten free, it's not dedicated. And mine is, even though I don't have celiac, we don't have any wheat, any flour in the house ever. And so I had a half of a cake and I just texted her and was like, come over and I also have some donuts. And so she picked them up for her and she's like, she's going to be so happy to just get to eat something and not be afraid that, it might have cross contamination. So yeah, I
Right.
love to share.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, something else you're excellent at is titles. So, Against
Oh,
All Grain,
thanks.
it tells you everything that you need to know, but it's also very catchy and I think the against part is it's a big hook. Especially back then. Now it's
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
commonplace, but back then I was like, "Oh, what is this about?" And it's almost provocative in a way, like before people
Yeah.
knew about gluten-free. And like your book now, Make It Easy. It just
Yeah.
immediately grabs me. It makes me feel like, yes, I want that because you get me. So how do you come up
Oh,
with titles?
Oh my gosh. Well, so Against All Grain, I've actually kind of moved away from, even though it's still fully what I am known for. It started to feel a little negative over the years once I
Mm,
got past that point. But honestly, when I first started eating this way, I just felt like I was the only one. I was like the fish swimming upstream. I was going against the grain. And then I had to cut out all grains. I could not eat a single grain. And so my husband and I were like back and forth and going over things. And I was like, against all grain, I can't have any of it. And I'm going against the grain. I'm doing something different. And so that's kind of where it came from. Oh my gosh, we had so many funny names at the beginning that just did not. I mean, we had like this long list, and I think I even created a couple websites with them. And I was like, this doesn't work. And then the titles, I don't know, they always come typically after I've created the book. This one, I think, started with a very simple title of like Danielle's Meal Prep, or something like that. I forget what it was. And then there was another subtitle that was Cook Smarter, Not Harder. We kind of just like go through lots of things. And then my Substack is called Make It Good. And that also comes from a show concept that we've been working on for a really long time where, basically people always come to me with their recipe requests and they're like, I miss my grandma's cinnamon rolls, but I can't eat grains and dairy. Can you make it good? Like, can you recreate this recipe and can you make it good? And so as I was working on this book, I was like, well, can we make it easy? How easy can we make this book? And so that's kind of where it came from. I think the publisher sometimes, I feel like publishers also weighed in on that. It just, sometimes when you have a book title at the end, you're like, I don't even remember it morphing into that, but at some point it did. I think it was Danielle Makes It Easy at one point, and then we kind of shifted things around. So,
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think
yeah,
about branding when you're talking about the titles of? Do you think about branding of like your Substack and the book now because they're both make it
yeah,
easy, make it
yeah.
good?
Yeah, I do. And especially now, as I see 7 books sitting on a shelf together, back when I first did Against All Grain, I self-titled it because I actually didn't think I would write another cookbook. I didn't realize, that somebody who wasn't Ina Garten or Pioneer Woman could actually write this many books. And so I kind of just threw everything I could into that first book. And then we kind of started titling them, like Against All Grain, Meals Made Simple. And we just kind of went from there. But yeah, I really think about what they're all going to be like together. What can work well for hashtags, what can work well for website slugs, what can work, there's so many different things that I think about when I'm finishing kind of the title. And also just that it's not too complicated, but it also, like you said, in just a few words, you kind of understand or at least want to know more about what it is. I mean, I have one book that's just called Celebrations. It's like very simple. You kind of understand everything in there is like holidays or special gatherings. And then Healthy in a Hurry is another one that I put out. So yeah, I like titling them, and I like seeing what the book is in its entirety first, though, before I really land on a title so that I understand kind of, all that it's encompassing.
Do you ever get stuck on the working title in your head before you have the final title, and then
Oh
it's
yeah. Yes. I mean, that's typically, we don't usually land on a title until I see first pages, so like the
Oh,
recipes have been
wow.
edited, they're in there because I just think it's, you really don't, the cookbooks take almost 2 years to create, to write, to develop, to edit, photograph, all of that. And so we obviously have to have a final title by the time we go out, to booksellers and they announce it through the publisher. But yeah, I'll call something the old title sometimes for a while, and then like all my files have to get renamed. It's like I've used Scrivener, and it's like this old title, and I'm like, oh wait, it's not called that anymore. It's not meal prep. Like we moved it. But yeah, it's fun. It's a fun process.
Yeah, I love it. I'm actually usually pretty bad at titles, although the last few books I've written, the titles that I have used as my working titles have somehow stuck.
They
So maybe
stuck.
I'm
Oh,
improving,
that's fun.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I'm working on a baking book, and I have no idea yet what I'm going to call it. So it's like right now we're just fun, like kind of, I don't know, we're calling it the Baking Bible. And I'm like, that's not going to actually be the title. I'm not going to name
Right.
something the Baking Bible, but that's just what the concept is in my head. So, who knows? Who knows what it'll be? I might have to
Well, we'll
crowdsource
see.
on a Substack and get people to give me some title
Hey, that
ideas.
that would be fun. I would be there. Okay, so obviously, your ulcerative colitis has shaped a lot of your career, but
Hmm.
also you achieved success quite early in your career as well. And so, like I mean, you're a multiple times New York Times bestseller. You've been on the Today Show many times, which I also really am excited. I want to talk about. Your work has been in Oprah magazine. You were a Forbes 30 under 30. I'm going to stop embarrassing you now,
I
but what
know.
I
I'm
would like
like,
to
that all
know.
feels like ages ago.
But how has that shaped your career in any way, having that kind
Mhm.
of recognition early on?
Well, I mean, certainly it's given me so many opportunities. And it also was, I think, especially at the time and feeling like I was kind of doing something different and new, it was absolutely affirming that I was making an impact. I remember when the first cookbook made the New York Times, and there was one other paleo book on the Times list, but every other spot was held. And this was a time where they had a food list, by the way, which they don't have anymore. But every other spot was held. I think Ina held 3 spots during that list, and maybe Ree Drummond had 2 spots, and then it's me and this one other paleo book, and I'm thinking like, I can't believe this many people are interested in this, that it puts me and my title up with these massive women, these mainstream cookbook authors who I have always looked up to. And our numbers weren't the same, but just the fact that there were that many people interested in what everybody considered kind of a niche market. So
Hmm.
it was affirming to me that there were more people that were like me that needed it, and that I needed to keep going so that I could continue to spread that message. I will say, as you list all those things to me, and this is just, we always get into our own heads, I'm thinking there's so many creators who have come after me that are incredible, so many authors that have come after me that are incredible. And the accolades and the awards and the things that happened in my early career don't really happen as much anymore. They're few and far between. And so I still feel like I'm fighting, to get the place and the recognition and get the word out there about the books. And I do feel like I have a lot of trust with my audience. And that is something that I do not take for granted and that I'm incredibly grateful for, that they continue to buy books because the last books worked, because the recipes worked. And so while there's a lot of new people, maybe they don't have the trust that I have because I've done this for so many years. But there's, the new shiny things, like social media is tough. And a lot of times I feel like a washed up dinosaur that cannot keep up, that people who started creating recipes 8 to 10 years after me have grown bigger than me. And I don't care about the numbers, honestly. I really don't. It's that it's so hard to get the word out about the work that I spend so much time doing. That's probably the hardest part for me. So I almost feel like the things early on, while they weren't easy and I definitely worked hard, the landscape was a lot different at that time to actually get your work seen. And so I feel like it was amazing, but it's almost like a blessing and a curse at the same time, because there's a piece of me that's like, I just wish I could go back to those days. I feel like I have to fight a little harder these days to get the word and the message out there.
I think that is a very common theme in creative careers, where there's no point at which you've just suddenly made it and you can coast for the
No,
rest of your career.
no.
It's every single book, that you're putting out. It's the constant effort of writing your newsletters, and reaching that
Yeah.
community.
Well, I was just going to say the community aspect. Like if you disconnect from your community, I have nothing. They are what keep me going. They're why I continue to write the recipes I write. They're who buy the books. And so it's just tough though and frustrating when you can't actually reach that community that chooses to be there.
Right.
It used to be so different back in the day. It's like anybody who chose to be there, you could reach them. There were no algorithms, all of the noise of everything. So, but yes, I agree.
So how do you nurture community? Because I know your community they're so loyal, they're so dedicated. And I do think a lot of that is because you are very open, you're vulnerable,
Mm.
you share real pieces of yourself. But in terms of practical, if anyone's listening or watching and they're thinking, how do I actually interact with my community? How do they get them to
Mm.
stay and be interested? Are there any tips, tricks?
That's why I came over to Substack, because it was just so much easier to actually connect with people. And I think where I was getting was becoming frustrated with the apps, but then it was turning into frustration with the community, even though it wasn't their fault. And so then I'm pulling back and then realizing like, but I don't want to pull back from them. I just want to pull back from the apps that make it so hard, to connect with them. But I think that is, to your point, just sharing really vulnerably. I always just really try to put myself out there. I mean, essentially the way that I look at things is if somebody saw me out on the street or at a restaurant, or they came up to meet me, that I would be the same person that they're seeing online. And so, whether that means not using filters, or, just I never re-record an Instagram story. If I mess up, I put it out there because that's me and that's who I am. And I don't want things to be overly processed and thought about. And then I think just continuing to ask, for their suggestions, for their reviews. That's every recipe I create. It comes from somebody requesting it. And so I created a new series on Substack where I'm actually interviewing my community members. There's so many podcasts out there that interview other experts and authors and actors. And I wanted to talk to the people that have been there all along, that are going through something that, everybody else that's listening understands. And then I take their recipe requests. And two, off of social media and off of digital and everything, I'm going on tour for this cookbook, just 8 cities because I have to protect my health and my family. But those evenings are my favorite thing ever. I wish I could do them more than every 2 years, because it's just so invigorating for me to get to be with real people and to get to hear their stories. And then for everybody that's gathered in the room to understand, like, I'm surrounded with people who understand what it feels like to have chronic illness, to have autoimmune disease, to have food allergies, to eat a certain way and kind of feel different sometimes. But everybody around me actually is like me. And so that's another way that I just try to really stay connected and in touch with my audience and with people who really have just been super supportive over the years. Funny
I
story,
love
actually,
that.
my audience did a Kickstarter and raised money for my very first book tour for Against All Grain.
Oh,
And so it's
wow.
just been something I've always gone back to. Yeah, publisher had no budget, no marketing budget, no PR. I didn't even get an advance when we're talking about creators and authors, zero, zero advance for that book.
Wow.
And so it's just something that I go back to always where I'm like, they raised money for me to come out and come to bookstores so that we could all meet each other and they could share their stories and we could have that moment together. And so it's something that I want to make sure I do for every book to get out there.
I think that's really wonderful. And so you're going on tour now for Make It Easy, and I'm
Hmm.
excited for you to get to connect in
Thank
person
you.
again. It really is so special to get to meet your readers, and
Yeah,
you're real on video, you're very unfiltered like you say, but there's something incredibly irreplaceable about being in
right.
person.
Right. Well, and especially with something like this, I love to bring the community together because some people come alone. Some people come and then they sit next to somebody who they're like, oh my gosh, like you understand, like maybe we don't have the exact same disease, but you understand what it's like to live like this or to eat gluten free and so there's just this aspect of community that I leave after the night, but they all are there and they can connect, after that and hopefully inspire and give each other support. And that's what I love about it.
That's fantastic. Does it take you forever to get through your signing line? Because I feel like you're the kind of person who wants to talk to everyone, and your publicist or the booksellers are probably like, okay, we have to go a little faster.
They do. And I always tell them no. I'm like, you need to just block off time because I do. I don't want to rush people through. I want to hear from them. I want to hear their stories. And so, yes, the signing line sometimes can be really long. The last one, we limited it to 150 people. And then the rest of the evening, we just had like more of, cooking demo and a chat. And so not everybody got to come through it because it can be really draining on me. And I am not the type, if I'm only going to do 30 seconds or 15 seconds, I'm just not going to do it because I just don't think it's fair to anybody. I think there's an emotional side of things that is just it's too short. But yeah, people always they get frustrated with me.
Well, it's interesting. So I was in France earlier this year doing events, and
Yeah.
their system of book signing is so different from ours. And so I was actually
Ooh.
confused about it. So they will block up. So at least a few of us, we were up on the main stage, like they had like a big signing area for like the big
Yeah.
authors that were invited, and they blocked off huge chunks of time, like 4 hour
Mm.
signing sessions. And
Wow.
first of all, I don't speak French, so like I couldn't go very long with each of my
Yeah.
readers. But I was doing the very American way. Like I'm used to being at places like Comic Cons and book festivals where you have
Yeah.
less than a minute with each
Mm.
person. Like I've done, 200 signings in an hour, where
Wow.
maybe not that much, but I think it was like 30 seconds per person.
Yeah.
And so you're used to going very fast, and you kind of got your spiel
Yeah.
down, you ask a few questions and you're signed, you can do
Yep.
everything at the same time.
Yep.
And so the way it worked at the Paris Book Festival was it was ticketed. And so people would be
Mm.
waiting in line. And then I would be half an hour into a 2 hour set block. The next tickets don't start until the next 2 hour session. And there'd be no one in my line. And meanwhile, the
Huh.
French author next to me, she's taking forever. And at first I thought, gosh, she's never going to finish. Like, what is she doing? What an amateur. It turns out the French, they want to connect more and they budget that
Yes.
time to
I love
chat.
that.
And so then I was just sitting there and they're also, but everyone was so respectful too. They would not get in line if they didn't have a ticket. And so like people who wanted to
Oh.
get my autograph, they would go to my publisher's booth and say, "Oh,
Oh, so
is
funny.
Evelyn going to sign another time?" They're like, "You could go in line now." So yeah,
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
it's a very different system. If I had spoken French, I would have wanted to spend more time
Yeah.
because they give us that time. So anyways,
Right, right. I like the tiered aspect too, because then people aren't just waiting in line. That's what I hate. I like to do
mhm,
kind of more evenings where they get to hear a moderated talk and see a cooking demo because the days of waiting in a big long snaking line and just under the like fluorescent lights, I'm like, I just don't think anybody wants to do that. So I love that aspect. I've been to a bookstore before where they did like hour increments and you kind of got to go out and peruse, but you knew you had to come back at that time. That system was amazing because then it just kind of gave people some freedom. I think some people went and got
yeah.
food and they came back. I was like, this is great.
That's brilliant. I have actually not
Yeah.
seen that before, so I really like that. Okay,
Yeah.
I am dying to ask you what it's like to be on the Today Show, what it's like behind the scenes. I know you've put out pictures before on your Instagram, on your Substack, so I
Yeah.
want to know about that, and then we're going to wrap by talking a little bit about your
Okay.
book. So, but tell
Oh
me,
my
what
gosh.
is it like? Because you've been on the Today Show multiple times.
I have. I'm so thankful that I keep getting invited back there. Just a quick backstory, but that I grew up watching it. And when my very first book came out, just saying like no marketing, no PR, I didn't have anybody. I went out and just stood at the plaza and was just handing them out to all of the anchors as they came out. And I didn't make it on that time. I didn't make it on the next book. I think it was my third book that I got invited to be on. And I've gotten to go back every time and then a few times in between. They make it so incredibly easy. Make it easy. Just put that that in there. They are amazing, honestly. They're the most welcoming, I think. They're the most welcoming show I've ever been on. I've been on a lot of shows. Not only are the anchors actually who you see, they're like actually friends. They spend time together outside of the show. They've got this beautiful, just like friendship and almost family that you just
Mhm.
get to be part of when you're there. And then from the culinary side of things, they are incredible. I mean, you send your recipes, you put them into a certain format. They've got the most amazing food stylists. You walk onto set and, before you're about to go live, they kind of walk you through everything. You've got your stations. It's very much like we're talking, you have to fit a, recipe that typically takes 30 to whatever, however many minutes into a sometimes 3 to 5 minute, segment. I think the longest segment I've ever had on the Today Show was 7 minutes. And that is like, we had so much time. And so they have it all, movie magic, right? They've got like a couple steps, but then they have a completed version, but then you go through a couple more steps. And then there's the next kind of completed version. They call them heroes. And then you've got like your hero in the front that's like fully done. So they make it really, really easy for you. You're not actually really cooking anything. You get time to kind of talk, through to the hosts. And it's just a very seamless process, which it has to be because it's live TV, but yeah, it's really fun.
That is so cool. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay,
Yes,
so
yes.
let's talk about Make It Easy. This is a little bit
Yeah,
different from your previous books. There are still a lot of recipes, but it's also a meal prep workbook. And like you said, your
yeah,
aim is to make things easy. And I love that you are going to be talking about different prep personalities, because I think there's
yeah,
definitely the people who get a little like seized up, like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can like do a big Sunday prep day or anything like that. So yeah, tell us about
yeah.
how you came up with this idea and who it's for.
Yeah. So, I was actually asked to do a meal prep book by 10 Speed, who's with Penguin Random House. And it was shortly after the pandemic, and meal prep was very, very popular. And they don't typically ask me to write a certain subject. I usually pitch them kind of what I want to do next. And so I said yes, but I said I don't want to do a meal prep book like everybody else has been doing. What I saw coming out of that was meal prep was making one dinner or making like three things and then just dividing it off into some containers and kind of like eating the same thing for every meal. And I'm like, I have 3 kids, I have a husband, I also really love food, and I'm not really into making, like 6 pounds of ground beef on a Sunday and then just trying to like morph it into something different Monday to Friday. I don't want to eat ground beef with different sauce and different vegetables 5 days a week. And so I said, I want to make one, but I want to make it more meal prep and menu planning for families. I want to do it more in the way that I cook, for having 3 kids and busy sports and running a full-time business. And as I started to get into it, I realized there's actually a lot of different type of meal preppers. There are the type that cook one meal and divide it off and stick stuff, into containers and just pull them out. There's the people that can take a whole Sunday and they can cook, 5 different batch cook dinners and have them ready to just pull out and reheat. There's the people who can just have the time to kind of like prep their herbs and their vegetables and maybe cook a protein or make a couple sauces, and then there's the people who don't really have any time at all. And they just want to fall back on like pantry staples. They want to do some store-bought shortcuts. And so I think we identified like 5 or 6 different meal prep personas is what I call them. And I change from persona to persona from week to week, right? It just depends. If we've got a baseball tournament and I'm gone for 4 nights, then I have to, like morph into this other person. If I've got time and we're at home a lot and I'm like really into cooking, and it's not 111 degrees, then I can do a little bit more. And so the recipes are kind of developed in that way. And with that in mind, there's like lists of, who you are and what recipes might be best for you in that season of your life. But every single chapter is a meal plan. And so after pulling everybody through my audience, I actually had a meal plan membership for a while. And we found from them that 4 nights a week for kind of like the standard American family is the max. People have high ambitions. They go to the store and they buy stuff for 7 nights, but life happens and you don't always have time. And so every chapter has 4 dinner recipes and full comprehensive grocery lists along with QR codes so that you can customize them if you don't eat red meat or you only want to cook for 2 people that week or you only want to cook 2 of the meals. You're going to be traveling. There's lots of different things. So you can customize your grocery list, your meal plans, or you can just follow them to a T and have every single bit of, brain space taken away from you. It's all there. It's all planned. There's make ahead steps. There's prep ahead steps. If you are feeling ambitious and you're like, I can prep, all of this on a Sunday and just really take all of the guesswork out of the rest of the week. It's all laid out there for you, but it's also individually separated on each recipe. So that if you're just like, I don't want to do a meal plan this week, I just want to make this recipe and this recipe, it tells you what you can prep ahead, what you can make ahead.
Okay.
And then, of course, you can use the QR codes to create your own grocery list so that you can just take your phone with you to the grocery store instead of, big hefty book. You can also print the full four meal week long grocery lists as well. And then in addition to that, there's, the other thing I found when I was looking through and researching lots of books was most meal prep books only take care of dinner. There's some that do like breakfast and lunch, but I'm like, I have 3 kids and we have other meals and snacks during the day. And so all the other chapters outside of the 15 weeks of meal plans are all make ahead recipes. So there's make ahead breakfast, make ahead snacks, make ahead desserts. And then there's something that I call back pocket dinners, which essentially are not make ahead, but you can forage your pantry and your freezer and make these dinners without having to go to the grocery store. So that when you really do have one of those nights where you're just like, I'm walking in the door at 7:30, I don't want to get takeout, I just want to throw something together, then that's kind of where those come in.
That's perfect. For me, at every Saturday or Friday night is when I need to sit down and do my meal planning for the rest of the week.
Right.
And honestly, it's kind of one of my hated chores. I know I need to
I
feed the
know it
family,
is for most people.
Yeah, thank you for this. I'm very
Yeah.
excited personally for this
Yeah.
book, and everyone
Yeah.
else
What
should
I
go out and
find,
get a copy.
I know we're running out of time, but
No,
just really quick, what I
you
find
can
with
keep talking.
people with meal planning is that everybody wants to do it, but it's so much work to think about what goes well together, what utilizes proteins or similar sauces or things where you don't have as much waste at the end. And so just the puzzle piecing of it together, then also, once you pick your recipes, figuring out your grocery list and saying, oh, I need an onion there, an onion there, an onion there. I need garlic here, here, and here. I need, 2 pounds of meat here, but I need another pound here. And so that aspect of it is just a lot of work. And that's what typically I think kind of keeps people from actually doing it and doing it long term. And so I wanted to just do all the work for everybody and stick it in there and they can just follow along.
Well, I thank you for that. And I'm sure many, many, many other people do, especially parents, busy parents out there.
Yes.
And people
Yes.
with jobs, like people you work all day and like you get home and you
Right.
just think, I don't want something healthy to eat, but so
Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
This is
Yeah.
fantastic.
I'm one of them. I'm going to use it just as much as I hope everybody else uses it.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So you're going on tour. Where can we find you online and your tour information?
Yes. So DanielleWalker.com or my Substack publication, Make It Good, which I email a brand new recipe every single Thursday for my paid subscribers. I send out a newsletter every week for all my subscribers. And then I'm at Danielle Walker on Instagram. So you can find tour information, book information kind of through any one of those different places.
I love it. Thank you so much for being on Creative, Inspired, Happy. You are creative and you have inspired me. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Want more writing advice and career insight? Join thousands for free at creativeinspiredhappy.com to go behind the scenes with best-selling authors and get access to our book club for writers, creativity challenges, and more. I can't wait to see you there.